They laughed when Gerald shoved my face into the cake. It wasn't a neat cinematic moment. It was messy and loud and humiliating in a way that lives in a body long after the frosting has been washed away. Vanilla filled my nostrils. Buttercream clung to my eyelashes. My navy dress, a safe, sensible choice, became a smear of white and sugar. Someone offered a napkin like an afterthought. Somewhere phones were already rising to record. My name is Diane. I'm 30. To them I was the quiet sister in sensible shoes, the graphic designer who lives in Capitol Hill and drives a beat-up Honda. To me that identity was deliberate. I chose it like a coat to wear into rooms where people might reveal their true shapes. At 24 I took a reckless gamble on 2 kids with an app idea and $5,000 in spare change. 2 years later that company sold. 4 million turned into 40 and then into quiet investment. I never announced it because I wanted to know who loved me for me, not for a balance sheet. That night at the Fairmont Olympic, the mirrors and chandeliers and floral explosions were meant to declare a different truth. This was Gerald and Maria's show. Gerald's family, the Caldwells, were the kind of people who broadcast status like a radio frequency. Edward in a perfect suit. Sophia wearing diamonds that flashed like threat lights. They moved through the room sizing people the way sommeliers judge wine. Maria beamed like she'd stepped into a dream. I wanted her to be happy. I wanted to stand close enough to witness who would step forward when the mask shifted. It had started months earlier at a dinner where they brought their best performance. "So Diane," Edward said, cutting into his steak with careful precision, "graphic design in Seattle must be tough." His tone wasn't curiosity, it was assessing. Sophia smiled, the sort of smile that trims you down. "Oh, we can cover the wedding," she offered like a favor that doubled as an insult. Maria laughed too fast. Gerald sipped wine like a man who thought the glass was part of the costume. I sat deliberately ordinary. A simple blouse, a skirt that read work, a small crystal frame worth $60 waited folded in my bag like a quiet proof that I cared. Their comments were currency. They paid in condescension. We drove home arguing. "You don't know him like I do," Maria said, when I said she deserved better than a man who let his family mock people. "He's my fiancé," she said. "You're overreacting." I pulled over and told her then and there I couldn't watch her marry into that. She slammed the car door and left, and for the first time in our lives we stood on 2 different shores. I kept my money private because I wanted to see who she chose before they knew what I had. I wanted her to have a choice that belonged to her, not a life that came with a calculated ROI. It was selfish maybe, but it felt right. The Fairmont invitation arrived like an ultimatum, formal attire, June 1st. I almost didn't go, but I wanted to be near her even if she had chosen wrong. Valet took my Honda with a polite, pitying lift of the chin. The lobby smelled like lilies and intent. Guests flowed like a current of composed wealth. Sophia swept toward me like a choreographed greeting. "Diane," she said, smiling precisely. "This is Maria's sister." Heads tilted. Eyes checked my dress, my shoes, the wrongness of my understatedness in a room designed to punish understatement. They seated me at row 8. The front rows were for those whose names sustained reputation. Dessert was unveiled like an altar. 5 tiers, chocolate sculptures, gold-dusted petals. Waiters moved like they were on strings. I ate fruit because diabetes keeps a ledger no matter how social you try to be. A waiter returned with almond cookies made with stevia because someone had noticed. I was grateful for small kindnesses. Gerald put on a show. He hovered in the crowd, a merry little king of smugness. He found me with a sneer and a glass of champagne and leaned close enough to make the perfume around him decide the space. "Fruit," he said loud enough for a half circle of guests to hear. "At a 5-figure cake and a 5-figure reception. Apples for you." His laugh wasn't private. I told him I was diabetic. I said it steady. He heard me the way a man hears a line in a speech, and decided to make it a punchline. Before anyone could step in, his hand flew. My face hit cake. The impact was crude and animal. Frosting filled my mouth and eyes. For a second the whole world was white sugar and the flaring sting of being reduced to a gag. Maria slapped him. It sounded like thunder in a room built for silence. The slap cut the joke like a blade. Phones rose. Lights flashed. The hall buzzed with the small, efficient noise of strangers deciding how much they wanted to be on video now. Some people laughed at first, a reflex to discomfort. Others flinched. My parents' faces were a map of confusion, anger, humiliation. The gag had become grievous. Then Charles stood. He was at the back, a man acquainted with boardrooms and early-stage investment chatter. He stepped forward like someone who carried the right name in the right circle. "Let me clear something up," he said, voice cutting through the whispered murmurs. He named me Diane Caldwell, early backer, Innovate Solutions, 5,000 turned into millions, billionaire. The room negotiated the sentence like a shock therapy. Phones clicked. Strangers checked feeds. Gerald's grin collapsed. Edward's composure cracked. The laughter ran out of oxygen. They had made a calculation. Underplay equals use. They had been right until they were not. When the numbers came into the light, the predators in the room realized their mistake. Edward tried to smooth it. Apologies, offers. The old language of tidy reputational purchases. Sophia smiled too hard and started talking about opportunities as if you could broker decency back on a ledger. Gerald tried to negotiate the moment into a laugh and failed. He looked small, and his smallness was no longer a punchline. It was a vulnerability they had never planned for. Maria found me in the immediate hush. Mascara streaked, breath coming fast. She said she'd been blind, that she'd been choosing appearance over truth. She had defended them because she wanted to belong and because love had, in her mind, always looked like stability. She escaped the ballroom in her wedding dress and came into the night to find me under the hotel lights. She told me she wanted out. She said she was sorry. She asked me to take her home. We drove through a city that felt both familiar and strange. I told her why I had kept my money secret. I told her I wanted her to pick someone who loved her without strings attached. She cried and admitted she'd let hope blind her. In the glow of streetlights, she leaned on me like both the sister she had always been, and the woman she was finally remembering how to be. By the time we reached my apartment, the Fairmont's lights were a smear on the horizon. The path back to a small living room seemed like the honestest architecture I could think of. We made coffee, stayed awake talking until dawn, and the thrum of the city quieted into a steady background. That night, we built something new from the wreckage. A decision, a plan, a shared strategy to get her out of a life that had been gilded to look like love. The clips of the cake shove spread faster than smoke. Social feeds looped the moment in dozen versions, captions sharpened into outrage and schadenfreude. Gerald called repeatedly at first, then with a thin fury when his calls were blocked. Edward and Sophia sent polished apologies with the soft edges of PR teams. Lines were drawn in inboxes and social circles. People who had smiled in the ballroom now whispered in comment threads. We sat, Maria and I, mapping steps. My lawyer friend Lauren said there was a path to annulment and to press charges for assault. Witnesses and video made the case strong. The legal path felt like work, and it was work we needed. But the deeper thing was the human calculus. What did Maria want from now on? Was she rebuilding or retreating? She chose rebuilding. We signed up for lawyers and for truth, and she moved into my apartment with her things in cardboard boxes and a heart that wanted to try again. People reacted in small, predictable ways. Friends sent messages. Charles called to check on me and to say he was glad someone in the room had the presence of mind to name what he'd known. He offered me an invitation back into circles I'd left by design. I laughed and declined. My life wasn't a stage to be tended. It was a shelter. Maria began work at a bookstore. Nights she took literature classes she'd shelved for Gerald's world. She found the small, honest pleasure of earning things herself. We planted herbs on my balcony, rosemary and mint and the stubborn parsley that refused to quit. We ate simple meals and remembered how to laugh the way we had when we were kids. Raw and unguarded. There were practicalities. I quietly seeded a scholarship fund for Maria so she could pay tuition without feeling like a dependent. It was done in a way that preserved dignity because I wanted the gift to feel like autonomy, not charity. She cried when she found out, and it was a clean, grateful cry that carried the shape of a sister's forgiveness. The Caldwells tried to salvage their reputation. They hired people who polished words, not behavior. In public, they issued statements that read like smoothed stones. In private, they tried to find ways to re-establish their narrative. Reputation can be a fragile mosaic, and when a single tile falls loose, it reveals the structure behind it. They were scrambling because they had treated kindness as currency and someone had refused to cash out. Nathan, no, that was a different family. This story had no redemption arc for everyone. Gerald faded into a shrug on social feeds. His friends avoided him like a scandalous wardrobe. Maria filed for annulment. The court process was methodical but merciful in its own way, because the videos and witnesses left little room for the theater of denial. It would be dishonest to say there wasn't a cheap thrill in seeing their faces when the truth landed, but thrill is not what carried me afterward. The quiet rewards were the things no headline could print. My sister's steady breath as she slept without adrenaline, the sound of a closet where her dress hung like a relic and not a mandate. The new cadence of Sunday dinners that smelled of slow-cooked chili instead of showy hors d'oeuvres. In public, the story flattened into a few lines. Billionaire sister gets caked. Bride leaves reception. Groom embarrassed. Newspapers ran it. People who had once smiled at me in the lobby now called to check in, their voices threaded with curiosity and the faint taste of guilt. Some reached out with apologies that felt sincere. Others asked about opportunities and offered themselves as allies. I chose my responses carefully. I had no interest in a new set of opportunists trading on my moment. The important work was quiet. We rebuilt boundaries. Maria learned to ask herself what she wanted instead of what she had been taught to want. She learned to sit with a single thought for longer than a social obligation. I listened. I paid for classes and lawyers. I taught her how to budget. We talked about the difference between help and takeover. The money in my accounts remained a tool I used when it allowed dignity to root itself rather than a weapon to wield. A month after the ceremony, Charles called again. He'd heard through mutuals that I was back to my life and asked if I'd consider mentoring a young founders group. He wasn't asking me to show my wealth. He was asking me to give the kind of advice I'd once wanted when I had $5,000 and an idea. I agreed because advice costs less than cold calculation and because some invitations are worth accepting when they let you widen someone else's possibility. Our parents watched the transformation with the humble pride of people grateful that the girls they raised had not been broken. They brought food over and sat longer than they used to. They had been stunned at first, but then they got practical. They helped with calls. They were steady in ways strangers had not been. That steadiness mattered more than any bank transfer. There were nights when bitterness tried to find me. It's human to imagine fire and to want it to burn, but the architecture we built was different. We chose repair over spectacle. We chose to make sure Maria had options and the means to walk a different course. We chose to teach other people how to hold their line when family asks for more than they can give. That was the real project I began to tend, not a foundation with a press release and gala, but a quiet practice of helping people craft their own future. I kept my accounts private still, not because secrecy is noble but because choice is. Some people asked me why I didn't move to a mansion or show the world what I had. The answer is simple. Money changes how people measure you, and I didn't want to be measured. I wanted to be known. Months slid into a new normal. Maria enrolled in more classes, reading novels she used to skip. She wrote an essay about the wedding and what she'd learned. She asked me to read it first. It was messy and honest and beautiful because it sounded like a woman who had learned to choose herself. We fought the quiet fights when a check came in for something I'd covered, when she needed space to articulate grief for what she'd lost. And we sutured each other with the same small stitches we had used as kids. People sometimes told me I'd taught them something, that I'd shown a way to keep dignity without spectacle. Others said I was cold, that I'd hurt people by walking away. I accepted both judgments because truth is never only praise. I was clear in my own mind that no amount of sympathy from the Caldwells could have been worth a life where my sister learned to shrink herself for someone else's ego. If there is a single line I want to save from that night, from the cake, from the shame and the revelation and the slow reclamation, it's this: choice is quiet and powerful. I kept my money to keep my options. I chose when to spend. I used it to give my sister a way back to herself, not to announce a victory. So yes, he smashed my face into the cake. The footage lives online and it will for a while. People will keep commenting and sorting themselves into camps. But the real thing that happened is smaller and true. My sister and I sat on a sagging couch in a tiny apartment and baked honey lemon muffins in a patched oven and talked about the kind of lives we wanted. Turns out that's enough. It was everything. The first court date felt unreal. Maria and I walked through the courthouse doors side by side, the echo of our heels a rhythm of solidarity. She wore a simple navy dress, no makeup beyond a little foundation, her engagement ring long gone. I kept my hand on her elbow, a small reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. Gerald sat at the defense table with a lawyer in an expensive suit and a face that carried the smugness of someone who thought he'd spin the narrative. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Maria stared at him once, long enough to make his shoulders shift, then looked away for good. The videos had already gone viral. Judges see things like this with caution, but no one could deny the footage. The slap of my face into the cake, the ripple of laughter, the way Maria's hand lashed across his cheek after. It was all there. Evidence wasn't a question, it was interpretation. His lawyer argued it was a prank gone wrong. Mine countered it was assault, humiliation, and emotional harm. Maria's lawyer added, annulment grounds, fraud, coercion, toxic environment. The judge listened, face carved in stone. Then he spoke. Humor ends where dignity is destroyed. That sentence stuck with me. It was more than a verdict, it was a philosophy. Maria got her annulment. Gerald got fines, community service, and the collapse of his carefully curated reputation. His parents tried to pull strings, but influence wilts when the public won't play along. The press framed it as the cake scandal at first, but deeper pieces emerged, commentators writing about toxic family dynamics, financial arrogance, sibling loyalty. The story no longer belonged to them. It belonged to anyone who had been mocked or dismissed and dreamed of standing up again. For me, it was strange. In a matter of weeks, I had gone from invisible sister to unwilling headline. People reached out asking for interviews, podcasters, journalists, even a documentary offer. I refused them all. I wasn't a spectacle. I was just Diane, a woman who invested well, loved her sister, and didn't appreciate being shoved into a cake. Maria changed too. She cut her hair short, sharp, like a line drawn across her past. She spoke with more authority, laughed louder, moved freer. Watching her rebuild was the real victory. It wasn't about Gerald anymore. It was about her deciding her own shape. But the Caldwells didn't vanish quietly. Edward sent a letter, 3 pages of apologies, excuses, attempts at justification. He wrote that wealth attracts scrutiny, that misunderstandings happen, that he hoped we could move forward as family. I burned the letter in my sink. Family doesn't humiliate family for fun. Family doesn't calculate worth by money or appearances. One night, Maria and I sat on the balcony sipping tea. She asked me if I ever regretted hiding my wealth. I told her no, because hiding it showed me everything I needed to see. It revealed who treated me with respect when they thought I had nothing. It revealed who only valued the visible glitter. And it revealed her strength. Once she realized she didn't need anyone else's approval. The city hummed below us. The air smelled of rain and rosemary from our balcony pots. And in that quiet I understood something new. Revenge hadn't been the point. Revenge was just the spark. The real story was reclamation. 6 months later, life looked different. Maria was enrolled full-time at the university, finishing the degree she'd once abandoned. She worked weekends at the bookstore, but her real joy was in the classroom. Literature, history, psychology. She was discovering herself in texts and lectures instead of in someone else's shadow. I stayed in my world of design, taking on projects that interested me rather than ones that padded a resume. My investments still grew quietly, silently, like roots under soil. I didn't flaunt them. I didn't need to. Then came an unexpected message, an email from a young woman I'd never met. She'd seen the videos, read the commentary, and recognized herself. My fiancé treats me the same way, she wrote. Mockery disguised as love. control disguised as care. I thought I was crazy. Your story made me realize I'm not. I'm leaving him. I read that email 3 times, and I cried, not because of sadness but because the cycle was breaking. My humiliation, my sister's heartbreak, our messy public ordeal, it had become someone else's escape hatch. Maria and I talked about it for hours. She said maybe we should share more, not as celebrities, but as sisters telling truth. We started small, anonymous forums, women's support groups, conversations where we told our story, stripped of headlines. It wasn't about fame. It was about giving people language for what they endured. Gerald, he disappeared into obscurity. Rumors said he'd moved back with his parents, jobless, reputation in tatters. I didn't check. I didn't care. Some stories end not with fire but with fading. That was enough. The Caldwells tried to rehabilitate themselves, hosting charity galas and smiling for society columns. But in the circles that mattered, people remembered. Memory is the one currency you can't buy back. As for us, we kept living. Our parents came over every Sunday, bringing pies and laughter. Maria dated again, cautiously, slowly, on her own terms. I stood beside her, not as protector, but as equal. If there's one lesson, it's this. Money doesn't reveal character, but it does expose those who chase it. Love without respect is a costume that eventually tears, and dignity, once defended, can never be taken again. So yes, they shoved my face into a cake. Yes, they laughed, and yes, for a moment I was the punchline. But the story didn't end there. It ended here, with freedom, with strength, with the bond between 2 sisters who refused to stay broken. That to me is the sweetest revenge of all. The walls of our house had turned into a prison. My father's rage was louder than thunder, my stepmother's whispers sharper than knives, and my sister, she played both sides, smiling sweetly when others looked, but stabbing me with her words when no one was around. I still remember that night, when my stepmother stormed into my room, accusing me of things I never did. Her voice echoed, "You are nothing here. If it weren't for us, you'd be begging in the streets." Her words sank into me, but instead of breaking me, they lit a fire. I clenched my fists and whispered to myself, "This ends now. They think I'm weak. They have no idea who I am becoming." I started gathering proof, silent recordings, messages, small moments they never thought I noticed. Each betrayal was a weapon I stored, waiting for the right moment. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. My father's reputation was everything to him. He boasted about honor, respect, and family dignity. Yet behind closed doors he let cruelty rule. One evening, during a family dinner with guests, I stood up, trembling but fearless. "Do you want to know the truth about this family?" I said, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. All eyes turned to me. I pressed play on the recordings I had kept hidden. His voice, my stepmother's insults, my sister's venom, it all poured out into the air. The room fell silent, my father's face drained of color as the truth shattered his mask. That night, the balance of power shifted. I wasn't the weak, silent girl anymore. I walked out, head held high, leaving them in the wreckage of their lies. For the first time in years, I breathed freely. I built my own life, piece by piece. No more chains, no more fear. And here's the truth I carry. Sometimes the family you're born into can be your greatest enemy. But the strength you find within yourself, that becomes your true revenge. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from family, but they also shape your strongest armor. Stand tall, gather proof, and let truth be your greatest revenge. And revenge doesn't always mean destruction. It can mean exposing the truth, reclaiming your dignity, and never letting betrayal define your life again. Thank you.